Valentine's Day, 2025. Deep in the Arizona desert, hikers make a discovery so horrific it silences even the toughest deputies. Trash bags scattered along a lonely dirt road. Inside, the dismembered remains of 14-year-old Emily Pike. Her arms were missing. The girl who just weeks earlier begged police not to send her back to the group home she feared was now gone forever. Who took her? And why was she discarded like nothing more than refuse? This isn't just a murder. It's a chilling indictment of a system that failed her at every turn. In this story, we unravel the haunting story of Emily Pike's disappearance and the terrifying questions that still remain. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe for more vanished and chilling mysteries. The flicker of the street lamp painted ghostly red over the quiet neighborhood of Mesa, Arizona, on January 27, 2025. At precisely 7:45 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, Emily Pike, a 14-year-old member of the San Carlos Apache tribe, slipped out of her assigned group home on foot. That pink and gray striped shirt she wore imprinted itself on every memory, every camera frame, every aching retelling. Surveillance cameras caught her departing, but authorities refused to disclose the exact time or location. Her sudden absence triggered something dormant in the community. Shock, outrage, grief. Emily had been placed in that group home, run by Sacred Journey Incorporated in Mesa, in September 2023, abruptly removed from her reservation home, over 100 miles away, after reporting a sexual assault. Local tribal social services had responded without involving law enforcement, and the assault case had gone nowhere. Emily, distraught and wanting safety, instead found herself uprooted. In the lead-up to January 27th, Emily had vanished before, not once, but multiple times. Body cam footage recorded during one of those earlier incidents showed her resisting officers' pleas as she cried, "I just want to go home. I hate it there." She begged to stay with her grandmother, to be free of the group home. Despite her plea, she was returned. Her roommate, Chelsea, a pseudonym, later revealed that Emily left that fateful night when a church group visiting the home distracted staff. Emily slipped quietly out through a back door or window, her path unseen, intentions unknown. She wanted to go see the boy she liked, and she wanted to talk to him, Chelsea said. For days, the group home staff conducted superficial searches. "I looked under the bed, in the closet outside," one employee told police. "The gate was open, a window screen kicked out. It was just a missing child, another runaway, another report," until it wasn't. Mesa Police Department noted her disappearance 2 days later on Facebook and entered her into NCIC the same evening. Yet tribal social services had not alerted her family or the Department of Child Safety. Emily's mother, Steph Docila, said she only found out a week later. Her daughter vanished, and she didn't know for days. Imagine the torment of that week. A mother pacing, frantically calling, praying each ring wasn't Emily's. Suppose the group home had spoken sooner. Suppose intervention had been different. Instead, system stalled. Tribal social services operated seemingly in parallel, disconnected from DCS and Mesa Police, an information blackout across jurisdictions. On February 14, 2025, Valentine's Day, the remains of a young girl were found along a dirt road off U.S. Highway 60, northeast of Globe. Hikers stumbled on contractor trash bags hiding a horrifying secret. Torso, head, legs, but no arms. Emily's arms were missing. Days later, official identification confirmed what every parent fears. An autopsy by the Pinal County Medical Examiner found blunt head trauma and facial injuries. Homicidal violence. Emily Pike was dead. The report of dismemberment sent tremors across the state. A 14-year-old girl, dismembered and discarded like refuse. The visceral horror shattered more than just a family. It shattered a community's faith. The Gila County Sheriff's Office took charge, joined by Mesa Police, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and, by early March, the FBI. Despite those agency alliances, no arrests have been made. Authorities mentioned 3 potential suspects, but their identities remain sealed. Rewards began stacking up, $75,000 from the FBI, another $75,000 from the San Carlos Apache tribe, and contributions from local partners. In total, over $300,000 in rewards were offered for information. The leak of a sheriff's memo describing graphic injuries fueled community outcry. Disturbing details spread online, stoking grief, rage, and a collective demand: justice for Emily. Candlelight vigils emerged across Mesa and tribal lands. At the intersection where she was last seen, Mesa Drive and McKellips Road, hundreds gathered, glowing candles in hand, as a screen projected her memory. They sang, they prayed in Apache to heal broken hearts. "We're not going to have a trio anymore," whispered her cousin Jaden, voice choking. Emily had been part of a close-knit trio, inseparable, laughing, planning shopping trips to the reservation. The community embraced Emma's family. She was a spark, a soft-spoken girl who loved K-pop Roblox animals. She had dreams, one day becoming a veterinarian. She lit rooms up with her smile, like Tinkerbell, her aunt said. Native Americans across the U.S. rallied, donning red handprints, sharing hashtag No More Stolen Sisters, hashtag Justice for Emily. Vigils sprouted in Colorado and Wisconsin. Some wore jerseys emblazoned with MMIW and the red hand symbol. Emily's death exposed deep failures in the system. At a May legislative hearing, officials revealed Emily had endured sexual assault, attempted suicide, and repeatedly fled. Yet agencies failed to coordinate. Tribal custody meant the standard Arizona DCS missing person requirements did not apply. "The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing," said Senator Corinne Werner. "We should be sounding the alarm," said Senator Teresa Hatafley. From their grief emerged action. Emily's Law, passed unanimously and signed by Governor Katie Hobbs. It established a turquoise alert system, an amber-style alert specifically for missing Indigenous people under 65. Arizona joined Washington, Colorado, California, and later New Mexico and North Dakota in adopting similar systems. Additionally, policymakers launched inquiries into group home practices. A Senate task force demanded understanding why a traumatized child was placed 100 miles away, with disabled alarms, no tracking. Emily's uncle Allred Pike Jr. spoke at the hearing. "We all failed her. She was discarded like she didn't matter. Trash bags, dismembered, tossed on the side of the road." Emily's story is the epitome of systemic failure and a call to action. Advocates highlighted the broader national crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women MMIW, advocating for better law enforcement training, alert systems, mental health supports, and tribal inclusion. A resurgence of interest in solving Emily's case is motivated by duty, solidarity, and the need to prevent another Emily. Online, people echoed the grief. A virtual honor run on International Women's Day was organized. People wore red, ran, tagged posts hashtag Native Women Run, honoring Emily while raising awareness. The details of that night remain fractured. Where did she go? Who was waiting? Was she lured? Or did she hitchhike, hoping to go home, only to meet the worst fate imaginable? All these questions swirl unanswered in the cold desert air. But Emily Pike is not forgotten. Her name echoes across deserts, city streets, legislative chambers, and social media. The turquoise alert system now stands ready to warn communities if another Indigenous person goes missing. This is her legacy, not resignation, but urgency. A legal shift in her name, a symbolic chorus of "Say Her Name." Hope that justice will someday come. They buried her in late March, when the desert light was already thinning into spring. The service was small and impossible and public at once. A folding table with paper plates, a line of people who knew her only from photographs, from the sudden headlines, from the marble of her face pressed into every phone and television screen. They laid a teenage jacket on top of the casket, one of those cheap, gaudy thrift store windbreakers with a bright stripe across the chest, and someone tied a hair ribbon around it, the kind her little cousin used to braid into Emily's long hair. The ministers spoke of light, and the tribe sang old songs that always seemed older than the people who sang them, and between each and the silence of everyone there felt like a wound. No one could stop returning, not really. The town of Globe and the reservation and the scattered friends in Mesa made pilgrimages to the chain-link fence where Emily had last been seen leaving the group home. Teenagers brought flowers and stuffed animals. Older women left sage and dried corn. People wrote messages on the pavement with chalk, her name in block letters, then stepped back as if what was written might detonate. The policemen who drove by started to slow down. Cameras were set up on every corner where a memory of her might be coaxed into the light. The investigation never fit what the headline writers wanted. There were no quick arrests. There were no confessions filmed under harsh lights. There were instead the small, patient things that real cases are made of: lists of phone calls, grainy surveillance frames that needed enhancement, shoe prints, a partial DNA profile dragged through databases and found to produce only fragments that matched no living suspect in the records available. Detectives stalked down leads that looked promising and then collapsed under the weight of time and distance. They interviewed scores of people, relatives, the staff of the group home, strangers who claimed to have seen a girl matching Emily's description. Each interview left the investigators exhausted and raw, as if they had been clawing at the edge of a dark well. The county detective in charge, quiet, thick-handed, used to bearing bad news, kept a small, battered notebook and wrote in it his impressions. He wrote that Emily had been frightened in the months before she left the reservation, that she had told someone of a man who followed her home. He wrote that she had been moved into the Mesa institution for her safety, and that safety had not been safety at all. But notebooks do not make arrests. They only keep track of grief in a sensible, almost obscene way. The FBI sent teams to comb the scrubland where the body had been left. They floated grids on the maps and ordered cadaver dogs and scoured phone records for the last pings. They took the group home's logbook, the security footage, the staff schedule. They executed search warrants on vehicles and called in forensic labs. The public did not see most of this. What they saw instead were press conferences where investigators repeated a careful script. "We ask anyone with information to come forward." The words had become a ritual. Tips poured in, sometimes useful, often not. A woman called claiming her cousin had been bragging in a bar about the crime. A trucker said he'd seen something on a lonely dirt road at dawn that might have been a body wrapped in a tarp. A man offered a map to a shallow grave in a canyon where he claimed he'd been told to leave a girl. Investigators pursued each lead with professional solemnity. Interviews, follow-ups, subpoenas. Most of the leads evaporated. Some led to dead ends that required painful apologies to families wrongly implicated. One tip was so specific and devastating that it forced officers to reopen old statements and re-examine a night marred by confusion and delay. It ultimately produced no charges, but it revitalized the search for the missing pieces, both physical and procedural. Emily's mother kept a vigil that outlasted the physical candles. Steph Docila learned to live inside the waiting room of the unknown. She spent nights poring over photos, tracing the curve of Emily's jaw with a thumb, replaying the last voicemail she'd left. There were moments when rage consumed her, a hot, economical fury that demanded names and teeth and closure, and other moments when she felt a heaviness so deep it made her body hard to move. She went to hearings, to town halls, to every testifying microphone the city government would allow. She learned the names of the bureaucrats who had placed her daughter in a facility far from home. She learned the processes that made such placements possible. She learned too painfully that systems designed to help a child could be blind and indifferent in moments when urgency mattered most. The group home's records were porous in places where clarity mattered. Shift changes were sloppy. Protocols that mandated immediate alerts to kin and to law enforcement were, in practice, negotiable. That sloppiness, that acceptance of routine, was the thing that people loved Emily for most, and also the thing that made her disappearance possible. Legislators convened, hearings were held, cameras broadcast angry faces. Families from other reservations came forward with similar stories. Runaways moved across long distances, cases that had smoldered. From mourning, an architecture of outrage formed. New laws, stricter oversight, a named alert system that would carry Emily's name like an exorcism. And yet, in the narrow hours between politics and press, someone walked the desert at night for the practical thing they always walk it for: money, sex, anonymity, speed. Empathy did not always travel those roads. The fact that Native women and girls are overrepresented in official tallies of missing persons had been known by activists for decades, and Emily's death threw those statistics into public taste like a red-hot coal. The turquoise alert was born out of that coal, a mechanical thing that might catch one other girl, might save one other mother, an endless hiatus of not knowing. Legislation is a salve. It is not a resurrection. The small towns clawed for answers in their own way. Volunteers fanned out through the brush on Saturdays, hands bloody if the thorns were bad, bottles of cold water in their makeshift packs. They set up folding chairs, and people spoke into microphones about how Emily loved to watch the way the sun hit the tailgate of her uncle's truck, about her quiet laugh, about a sketchbook she kept filled with drawings of animals she wanted to treat. They lit candles and wore red handprints on their cheeks. The vigils turned to protests that became weekly rituals. A set of footsteps cut through the dust, and the crowd marched in silence. They chanted not only for Emily, but for every sister whose name the world had failed to remember. At night, the case turned people into strange detectives. An anonymous message board bloomed with someone posted an old driver's license photo of a man who resembled a person a witness had described. Another poster countered with alibi after alibi. The internet can be a terrible place for a grieving family. It can also be the place where an overlooked detail is found. One user claimed a time-stamped photograph from a gas station camera matched the pattern of clothing Emily had been wearing. The detectives checked the timestamp and the footage, or tried to. The original had been overwritten. Technology can be a help and a betrayal. Emily's friends were transformed, too. The girl who had once been the subject of teenage mockery for liking the soft songs of K-pop now became a shrine in their grief. Her closest friends kept their cameras on and recorded themselves recounting the last days they'd spent together. The small cruelties of adolescence that, in hindsight, looked like warnings. She told me she was scared, one said into a shaky phone. She said there was a man who wouldn't leave her alone. I didn't know what to do. Those little confessions held their own awful clarity. That danger often arrives in the shape of familiarity, and the people who see it first are rarely heard. Legal battles mounted over jurisdiction and responsibility as families sued agencies for negligence. Attorneys filed documents thick with accusations about the failure to notify, the failure to coordinate, the failure to protect. The group home closed its doors for a time while regulators probed its record-keeping. Employees who had been hailed as caretakers were suddenly cited for lapses. Some workers refused to speak on the record. Others apologized publicly and privately. Apologies can sometimes feel performative, not enough to fill a grave, not nearly enough to prove anything, but they are also evidentiary, an admission that the system was porous enough for harm. For the detectives, the case was a long, cold crucible. In quiet hours, they reviewed the calls Emily made in the last weeks of her life. They ran phone metadata against known associates. They subpoenaed social media messages. They compared dental records, fingerprints, and the scant DNA that had been recovered. They tested fibers and tried to reconstruct the route Emily might have taken. Where the public wanted a tidy narrative, the detectives held a complicated one, a mixture of negligence and cruelty and luck, an algorithm of small failures that culminated in a monstrous outcome. They worked on the theory that Emily had left seeking someone she trusted, someone who could have given her a ride or an illusion of safety, and that trust had been betrayed. The family suffered those nights that never end. Steph sat in the dark and watched the empty chair where Emily used to do her homework. She replayed the last messages on her daughter's phone until the characters blurred. She learned to live with a grief that was not merely sorrowful, but suspicious, an interrogative grief that wanted to lay blame in a tidy square, to name a perpetrator and drive hope into the family. Instead, she had to learn to accept the small kindnesses that the town offered. Casseroles left on doorsteps, a neighbor who washed dishes without being asked, strangers who held her hand in the grocery store and said, "We're so sorry." Their condolence was a currency that could not pay any debt. Months went by. The investigators reported slow progress, DNA matches to unknown persons, a partial print that suggested the presence of someone with prior arrests, but not enough to point to a single face. They said they had persons of interest, but no indictable evidence. The public watched as the news cycle moved on, while the case lived in the inbox of law enforcement like an ember that had not yet been stamped out nor able to flare. Then came a winter night when a call came in that felt for a heartbeat like the one. A man dialed 911 and said, in a small, urgent voice, that he had something to tell them about Emily Pike. Detectives went through the ritual once more. The interview, the polygraph offer, the plea for details. The man's story had the cadence of arrest, patches of accuracy, and narrative gaps the size of canyons. He spoke of being in the area that night, of seeing a truck pulled over, of hearing muffled voices. He said he'd seen a young girl get into the back of a truck, and that later he saw a black bag. He offered a license plate he'd scribbled down and then lost. Investigators followed the tip until it led to a dead end. Records showed the plate belonged to a rental truck returned on the morning of the day Emily was found, but surveillance videos supplied by the rental company showed nothing. The men in the bar where the caller said he'd heard the boasting had flushed his accusation down with beer. They swore they remembered nothing. The case log grew by pages. Evidence room boxes multiplied with labeled bags of fibers, swabs, and the dull things of police work. One piece of cloth from the remote site matched a sample found in a car seized in another county, in a vehicle owned by a man with previous convictions for violent behavior. He had plausible alibis and a rock-hard attorney. The detectives included him in a surveillance watch, but then removed him when his phone records corroborated an out-of-state trip. Each dead end felt like a betrayal of the life they were trying to honor. Emily's story led to wider conversations about the treatment of Native youth in care systems. Her face appeared in op-eds and legal journals, and in the testimony of tribal leaders who had long warned of the vulnerabilities of their girls. The federal government announced initiatives to fund better coordination between tribal authorities and state services. It promised money for mental health support and culturally aware care programs. These initiatives felt, to those involved, like small steps toward a justice that could be systemic and preventative. They were also, painfully, a response to catastrophe rather than a requirement imposed before it. Months passed, and the case shifted into the slow, grinding work of cold case files. Detectives rotated off, new officers came in, and the institutional memory of a small town tried to preserve the ember of outrage. Alumni of Emily's school graduated, moved away, sometimes came back to help search for any clue that might have been missed. Each Memorial Day saw a crowd gather at the fence again, more out of ritual than expectation. The community had woven Emily into its moral fabric. She had become a reason to keep watch, to check on a neighbor's daughter, to ask questions again and again until someone answered. The final chapter of the story was not a courtroom scene and not a confession typed out on a single page. Instead, it was more like a collection of small reckonings. An ex-employee, pressed on months of interviews about the night, finally admitted to missing a standard check, an alarm that had been off, a pad that should have been secured and wasn't. She could not say whether her omission changed the outcome, only that she regretted it and had nightmares. A former detainee from a holding facility wrote a letter saying he had once been approached by a man who had a reputation for showing up near group homes in the evening. He named the man, but admitted his memory might have been colored by time and drink. Prosecutors found the evidence insufficient for an indictment. What remained was the human ledger. Apologies that could not bring back a life, policy changes that might prevent another death, a mother's slow pilgrimage through the workplaces of government and the quiet offices of legislators. The law bore Emily's name in the form of a practical, administrative instrument, a system that might dispatch alerts and coordinate better across borders. The system would help someone somewhere, perhaps. It could not, however, resurrect a girl who had loved animals and K-pop and who had once said she wanted to be a veterinarian so she could fix things. On the 10th winter after she vanished, a mural was painted on the side of a community center in Mesa. Emily's face was rendered in large, unblinking color. her hair in ribbons, her eyes like two small black stars. The artist painted a field of turquoise around her, the color of the new alert system, and above her head wrote in looping, hopeful script, "Not forgotten." Children came by and traced the paint with fingertips, feeling the shape of someone they had not known but had heard about often enough to care for, as if she were family. There was no tidy ending. There was no unmasking moment with a television crew who would finally say the words the town had been waiting for. The truth, for all its brutality, was stubbornly incomplete. Emily's murderer, if there was only one, walked on somewhere with no indictment to follow him, or he died with his secret, or he had been swallowed by the same systems that failed her: poverty, neglect, invisible abuse. There were possibilities and probabilities, but the criminal and the cause would not be crammed into a headline that gave the community the small mercy of closure. Sometimes very late, the family received anonymous letters, handwritten notes left at the mailbox that said things like, "I'm sorry," without a name, or "You were brave," with a single smeared fingerprint. They read the letters and kept them folded in a drawer as if evidence of consolation could be stored like loose change. Communities held onto those gestures the way fishermen hold onto rope, something to steady them when the tide was rough. The last image any of them would not forget was not the autopsy table or the yellow police tape fluttering in a desert wind. It was a much smaller thing. A video clip recovered from a neighbor's doorbell camera, grainy and shaky, that showed a silhouette of a girl running across a lawn beneath sodium lights, her hair loose and her jacket catching on a picket fence for a heartbeat before she freed herself and vanished into the night. In the clip, she looked like any other 14-year-old trying to run toward home. The frame looped 100,000 times in people's minds because it was both ordinary and terrible, the last known motion of a child seeking safety. In the end, the story of Emily Pike was not resolved into a single neat narrative. It spread outward into legislation, into the change of protocols, into the slow repair of social machinery that had once turned away. It persisted in the way neighbors began to check on each other's kids, in the Wednesday night vigils that slowly became a cultural practice, in the quiet rage that fed the activism of a generation. It became a cautionary tale, a proof that the smallest mistakes, an unlatched gate, an uncalled parent, a report misplaced, can coalesce into catastrophe. If justice in the human sense is to be found anywhere in this long, public bruise, it is in the insistence of the living not to forget. They remembered her by name. They passed laws that bore that name. They taught their children to call home. They placed on a shelf in the community center a photograph of a girl in a thrift jacket with a ribbon tied to it, and someone added a small stuffed animal and a postcard that read simply, "We remember." And in the quiet places where grief does not end and the desert wind keeps moving, Emily's voice remained an echo. It asked for the simplest things: to be safe, to be heard, to be brought home. The rest of the world answered with an incomplete ledger of attempts, some effective, some too late, but none that could be called a restoration. In that, the story is as chilling as any ghost story, not because of a single monstrous act, but because of the endless, accumulating human omissions that allowed it to happen at all. They closed the file in the sense that they set it on a shelf of open cases, accessible but not finished. They did not call the case solved. They called it active cold. For Emily's mother, there was no file number that could soothe the nights. There was a photograph, a song, a law, a mural. There was the unanswerable question of who had seen her run and decided not to follow, and who had decided to hurt her rather than help. That question is what made the story keep breathing, what made it, in its end, still a warning. Some things we may never know, but we can keep watch. The watch, that small and stubborn thing, was a final act of a community that refused to let a 14-year-old vanish without being pursued by memory. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you stay updated with mystery stories that strike a chord. Thanks for watching.